Howdy folks! Today's video will be slightly different from my typical format as I've recently celebrated my 200th subscriber. Now, 300 as of editing this video. I'd like to take some time to talk a bit more casually with you all while I answer some questions I've received on my channel as well as from my in-person community. Let's begin. First up, I got the question, what's the lore behind your name? So, this story is both long and short, admittedly. Obviously, I've been an Articuno fan for the majority of my life, and when I was a kid, I was looking for some sort of handle that would reflect that in a punny, hipstery, fun kind of way. And so I settled on the Antarctic version of Articuno, and thus Antarticuno. But of course, that moniker has followed me throughout my entire life, between my socials and obviously this channel, as well as some of my creations on sort of artist platforms as well. As far as Dynamax Doctor, that part has come up a bit organically through my engagement with my in-person community. We'll touch on this in a little bit, I think, but a lot of the questions and comments I was getting and the research I was doing tended to lean in a more scientific lens, and so Dynamax Doctor just had a nice ring to it, and the name has stuck in person and online. Second question, how did you become interested in Dynamax battles? So, as someone who took a hiatus from playing Pokemon Go for several years, I happened to come back to the game at a good time, last year in 2024. And so with the introduction of Dynamax battles, it provided a fresh take for someone like myself to get into the game without necessarily needing to have access to all of the mythicals I missed or all the megas I'd missed, with the fact that Dynamax battles introduced some mechanics like attacking, tanking, healing that resonated well with some of the games I'd played outside of Pokemon. Naturally, my interest was piqued. Within the first few Gigantamax battles, like with the Kanto Trio or with Gengar, I would say that I was hooked pretty quickly. Those first Gigantamax battles were tough, and I'm not the kind of player who tends to shy away from a challenge. So I dove headfirst into really powering up my Pokemon, doing research, reading up on all the different Reddit investigations from like-minded players who were, like me, just getting into the format and trying to understand these mechanics that weren't really explained very well, or the inner workings were pretty opaque at the time. And admittedly, I also had my own stumbles as I was powering up Pokemon seemingly haphazardly based on how much candy I had. I'll show a couple Pokemon within my collection on screen where I really went overboard in an investment perspective. And so a lot of my interest in educating other folks tends to be also powered by wanting other people to not make the same mistakes. What have been some of your favorite memories from doing Dynamax battles? Maybe some difficult battles you were able to complete with minimal assistance. So a few come to mind here. Recently, with the Max Finale event, I was able to solo Articuno by myself with the assistance of some Max Mushrooms, and I was also able to 3-man a Gigantamax Charizard, again with Mushrooms. I wish I had the footage from there, but unfortunately it's been lost to the sands of time. But if you're curious about how one might be able to do those types of things, you might want to check out some of my older videos where I show how Dynamax Omastar has been a critical piece of the puzzle that helps players be able to tank effectively against some of these bosses, and as one of the only rock-type attackers in the game, Omastar, again, was pretty key in taking those bosses down. Really, one of the things I wanted to talk about was when the Dynamax birds, Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres, originally came to Dynamax battles earlier in 2025. For those of you who weren't playing around that time, the way that these Pokemon were introduced into the game was a little bit different from how it is now. And they were introduced during Max Mondays and then persisted in some power spots throughout the rest of the week. So in those Max Monday events, it was really quite an exciting time because you had about an hour to complete as many Dynamax battles as you could, and so it incentivized players to power up their Pokemon effectively, to strategize, and to make the most out of that hour, where you wouldn't have to run around as much from power spot to power spot. You could just hit up any power spots and take those birds down. I have some really fond memories from those times, largely because I was helping organize my local community, helping people get into groups, helping them strategize, and back then we didn't really have as many Gigantamax Pokemon to choose from. In fact, many players didn't even have Gigantamax Pokemon to begin with, so these battles were admittedly kind of difficult if you didn't prepare properly. So I had a bunch of people coming to me to talk to me about what they needed to power up. People were using all sorts of Pokemon just to try and make ends meet. So Cryogonal against Articuno, obviously the Excadrills for Zapdos, as well as normal Dynamax Venusaur for Zapdos. And then ultimately, the story that comes to mind is when Dynamax Moltres came around. We were fortunate to have just been given Gigantamax Kingler a week or 2 weeks beforehand, and so I worked together with 3 other of my regulars at the meetup, and we all brought in Gigantamax Kinglers, and I had asked each of my friends to power up Gmax Foam Burst to level 3 ahead of time. And I also did that, but in addition to that, I also powered up Max Guard. And so what this resulted in was this crazy bum rush of the Moltres boss, where every Dynamax phase, the 3 of them would be able to hit hard with their Gmax Foam Burst, and I would be able to actually set up shields. And every max phase that I got to without needing to recharge all of my shields again, I could sort of hybridize and fill up some shields, but then hit with my Gmax Foam Burst along with the rest of them. So it culminated in one of the most epic max battles to date, where we were able to take down Moltres in really only 2 max phases. So that was really quite inspiring for me, and it reiterated that these battles are quite doable, but you have to prepare and you have to strategize appropriately ahead of time. Final question: is there anything upcoming that you're excited for? And so to answer this question, I think there's quite a few things that I'm excited for coming to Dynamax. First and foremost, we're in the middle of the Harvest Festival event, so it's a good time to pick up Applin Candy for the newly released Hydropple. But of course, if you're like me and thinking about Dynamax battles all the time, you'll know that Applin, Flapple, and Appleton are going to be making their way into Dynamax battles at some point, since Flapple and Appleton have Gigantamax forms. I haven't evolved a Flapple or Appleton myself, largely because of this, anticipating that I'll probably just be able to catch the evolved form and spare myself having to use 200 candy and 20 apples. So now is a really great time to catch a bunch of Applin, use those Pineapple berries for, quadruple candy. Yeah, really prepare for those eventual releases, even if those Pokemon are generally outclassed by Gigantamax Rillaboom. Secondly, Garbodor was recently announced in the November 1st Max Battle Day, so anytime a Gigantamax Pokemon is released, I'm always a bit excited. It's not going to be the most powerful Gigantamax Pokemon, as Poison type is not the best offensively. It gets outclassed by Steel oftentimes, and with 2 amazing Steel Pokemon in Zacian and Zamazenta, Garbodor is probably not going to have much longevity. But at least with its timing, you'll be able to pick one up, and if you have a ton of candy, it may be a more budget-friendly option for those who don't have tons and tons of Zacian and Zamazenta candy. Picking up a good poison Pokemon is great, so you can go into the wild area event later in November with a strong attacker for those fairy bosses. And so then, last but not least, that leads me to Grimmsnarl, which is coming out in the wild area event in November. And Grimmsnarl is going to be one of the best Dark-type Pokemon attackers in the format. Its typing is unique, not particularly defensive, but it'll probably provide a much more accessible and hard-hitting Dark-type attacking option. Right now we have the likes of Dynamax Gengar with its Sucker Punch, and Dynamax Urshifu. Again, the Dynamax form, not the Gigantamax form. Both of which come with some downsides, right? Dynamax Gengar doesn't have stab on its Dark-type attacks, and Urshifu requires a ton of candy and investment to get to, on top of the fact that it will eventually have a Gigantamax form, which we still don't know how that's going to be released, so investing into a Dynamax Urshifu kind of feels bad in my mind. So Grimmsnarl will be a really great way to dump a bunch of Impidimp candy into it and get a really great return for a Dark-type attacker. After that, there are actually quite a few Dynamax and Gigantamax events slated based on Pokemon Go's Save the Dates in the rest of November and December. So really looking forward to that and what they release. So with that, this leads us to the end of today's video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this change of pace where I'm just able to talk to you guys a little bit more casually. I'm so grateful that many of you have decided to stick around and listen to me ramble about Dynamax battles and the strategy behind it. So here's to more fruitful discussions in the future. If you liked today's video or are curious to check out more of my other videos, please consider liking and subscribing down below. Thanks so much.